The Imperial Palace is getting massive, but this is easily my most insane video yet. Every now and then, I just lose my mind. I have some utterly mental stroke of hobby inspiration, or perhaps hobby madness is a more apt description. I mean, look at this thing. The central spire of the Imperial Palace is over 3 meters tall and literally touches the roof. Now, you might think that everything I do is slightly mental, and I'm not sure I can argue. But today, we have something even more ridiculous. There is something so corrupting about a big new shiny box of miniatures. It's like a mystical force of hobby mojo that takes a hold of me and just makes me do insane things. Games Workshop, what have you done?
When Leviathan dropped last year, I wrote a custom rule set for Warhammer 40k to transport Dawn of War from a video game to the tabletop.
Light of the Emperor!
When the Osgiliath box dropped a year before that, I built a 60 square foot flooded city.
Mega layout. This is mental.
And even when Games Workshop released the previous edition of Age of Sigmar, I hacked up a bunch of Stormcast Eternals to build the Emperor's Proto-Space Marines, the Thunder Warriors.
Today's descent into hobby madness might be the craziest of them all, because the hordes of the Skaven are invading the Imperial Palace on Terra. And yes, I do know what I just said. Bear with me, and I promise this will all make sense. Maybe.
The Skaven are obviously not usually within the Warhammer 40k or 30k universes, but I have been absolutely in love with the Skaven horde since my Warhammer Fantasy days as a teen, and when I saw the new models for Age of Sigmar's new edition, I felt a particular hobby beast reawaken in me that had slumbered for decades.
But I have zero interest in Age of Sigmar. I've got more than enough on my plate with 40k and Middle-earth and the Horus Heresy, but I desperately wanted an excuse to paint up some sort of gorgeous converted Skaven army, and then I had a hobby light bulb of inspiration.
To understand the motivations behind this hobby insanity, first we need a bit of background. Hopefully, if you're watching this video, you're aware of my mental Imperial Palace scenery build. I've been working on this structure for 10 videos here in New Zealand, and for the first time, we can finally see the full city layout with the new massive tower we finished in the last video set up in all its glory.
So far, this structure has been designed for epic scenery, where a Space Marine is about 6 to 8 millimeters high.
But this is actually a dual scale board and can be used for 28mm scale 40k and 30k. We'll be looking at this in more detail in a future video, but 2 years ago, I actually began the 28mm scale part of the palace back in Australia, building a massive ruined cityscape to represent the petitioner's city, the war-torn slums which sit before the gates of the Imperial Palace, as well as a dungeon complex of bastions and passageways to represent the interior of the palace defenses.
My plan is to very soon ship those builds from Australia to join them to the Imperial Palace board here in New Zealand, to build an Imperial Palace super board for massive games of 40k, 30k, and a very special third game which is going to feature the ravening hordes of the Skaven pouring over the Imperial Palace.
I absolutely love the Warhammer universe of 40k and 30k, or the Horus Heresy, and while I love lining up huge armies and playing out massive battles from the books, just like my huge Mark of Kelth campaign, which will hopefully be returning very soon to Zorpazorp, as I've gotten older, one of my favorite styles of gameplay from a personal hobby perspective is cooperative story-driven games like Gloomhaven or Pathfinder, but nothing in the Warhammer sphere of rule sets scratches that itch in the right way for me, so just like Dawn of War Warhammer, I've been building a homebrew rule set for a little narrative campaign with my mate Jason for our Friday night Warhammer evenings that takes place in the ashes of the ruined Imperial Palace after the conclusion of the Siege of Terra. After the Horus Heresy, Terra is utterly devastated, and all manner of mutants and tortured, twisted life forms stalk the ruins of the once great capital of humanity's empire, scratching out a miserable existence, looting war gear from the battlefields of the Heresy, and after seeing the awesome new models from Skaven Tide, I decided that one of the many covens of mutants and heretics that Jason and I would have to cleanse in the name of the Emperor would have a slightly rat-like appearance. Honestly, as I pored over the models from the new box, it was kind of staggering just how much this idea already had so much traction in the native sculpts from Sigmar. These new Skaven are so warped and twisted and depraved, all we really need to do is a bunch of sick conversions to upgrade their war gear to represent them looting the battlefields of the 31st millennium, and they're going to be ready to be the scourge of the wounded Imperium. Every army needs a leader, so to try and drill down on the aesthetic for this wacky force of abhuman rat cultists, I grabbed the Claw Lord on Norbeast and got cracking. I knocked up the big rat cosplaying as a horse as per the instructions for now, and then started working on the Claw Lord. As I rummaged about my bits box looking for ways to transport this Age of Sigmar Rat King to the 31st millennium, I began to dream up a narrative for Snarkrot, Rat Lord of the Cult of the Fang. I fell in love with the idea that looted war gear would be seen as the ultimate currency or the status symbol within the cult, and amongst the horde of rat scavengers, Snarkrot would have the finest gear of all. So I replaced his Skaven pistol with a monstrous combi bolter looted from a Terminator, and then made an Adeptus Custodes Guardian Spear by removing the blade of his spear, mounting a second combi bolter to the rickety shaft, and then reattaching the blade in an underslung position. Then to tie it together, he got a Space Marine power pack on his back and some jerry-rigged las cannon power cabling to supply the energy field of the Guardian Spear. I added a bunch of extra details, some Imperial Guard carapace armor and the crazy totems off a Legion Praetor, as well as a whole heap of grenades and pouches to his rat steed, even with a Space Marine power sword, all strung up with some green stuff sculpted strapping to make some saddlebags.
I love this model so much. It was the exact aesthetic I was hoping to capture with this army. A tiny rat riding a bigger rat, decked out with looted Imperial war gear. How is the tiny rat holding a Guardian Spear, a Combi Bolter, and a Space Marine power pack? I don't know. Who cares? This is amazing. We're gonna go even more insane with the next unit. If you guys are grabbing the new Skaven Tide box, which goes on pre-order tomorrow, go and use my affiliate links down in the description. I've scoped out, I think, the best prices all over the internet, no matter where you live in the world, and every purchase through the links sends a little bit back to support Zorpazorp and all the madness here at no extra cost to you. So Skaven Tide, any of your Warhammer hobby supplies, hit up my affiliate links down in the description.
Now these little rats don't just loot guns and scraps of armor, they loot vehicles. And what better vehicle to conquer the war-torn hellscape of Terra than an absolute centerpiece of the Space Marine Legion's arsenal, a relic Contemptor Dreadnought. I found one of these old Forge World resin kits in my Heresy bits box and just could not resist the idea of this crazy team of rat mechanics finding this monstrosity of ceramite and somehow managing to get it semi-functional and riding it into war. Once the legs and torso were assembled, which was no easy task with the old resin kits, I began the first step of the ratification of this Imperial war machine. First, we need a pilot. A nice little clan rat cut down and stuck into the sensor assembly cavity worked nicely, and with a bit of green stuff sculpting to cover one of the arm cut points, our Ratmech pilot is ready. I love the theme of the cult infesting the ruins of Terra, and I really want to manifest that in every model possible, which means I need as many rats crawling over these looted vehicles as I can, so I assembled a few choice rats from the sprues, and then began to explore ways to create some more surface area for my rats by making some platforms jutting out from the Dreadnought chassis. Two of the shields from the rat snipers in the Skaven Tide box had a great aesthetic of wooden planks and banded iron, and I added some corrugated iron sheet to bulk it out, and then a bunch of steel piping struts to act as support beams. I tested out the formation with two sniper rats and a big banner boy to fly the colors of the Cult of the Fang as they battle for supremacy amongst the ruins, and then our final detail is of course the Dreadnought arms. Now I want to add even more rat vibes here, so I started with the big Dreadnought claw, which has it's long since functioning properly. It's all beaten up, so instead it's become a hidey hole for another rat popping out of the palm of the massive close combat weapon. But to get the posing of these arms right, I decided to grab a bunch of magnets from the magnetbaron.com and magnetize the key joints. I used a range of different sizes to get that dreadnought arm articulating nicely. For the elbow joins, I used the Magnet Baron pin vise and magnetization kit to recess magnets into the resin, and in no time at all, I had the first arm looking amazing. And then I knocked up a pretty mental left arm using the Carey's pattern assault cannon, but instead modifying the barrels as if it had been blown apart, and so the Cult of the Fang have simply spun it around and turned the massive magazine into a huge spiked bludgeon. I've been magnetizing different parts of a whole range of projects for years, from all the various weapon and equipment loadouts in our Dawn of War Warhammer series, all my Horus Heresy vehicles from tanks to titans, even destructible ruins on my Osgiliath megaboard. But for such a massive project as the Imperial Palace, we will need a lot of magnets.
If you need magnets for your wargaming, then look no further than the magnetbaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. Magnetbaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets which are super powerful and even have specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetized movement trays, and magnetized collapsible flight stands for the epic travel wargaming experience.
With magnets that cater for Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, and everything in between, even if you're making an army as insane as I am, you'll find the magnets you need.
I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. Magnetic perfection. So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up the magnetbaron.com, link down in the description, so go and show him some love.
So the looted vehicle vibes are getting me just very excited, but to keep converting Imperial vehicles, I need more rats to stuff inside them, so I decided to do a mass assembly of all of the clan rats in the Scaventide box. There is like 40 of these little buggers, but they actually go together pretty fast. I gently press the push-fit parts together so that I can easily rip them apart later for more wacky conversions, but now we can see every little clan rat we have at our disposal to kit out our looted vehicles. And after the success of the Dreadnought, I decided to lean even harder into this idea, and this time these pesky rat cultists have somehow managed to repair a solar auxilia Leman Russ, and they're going to go even harder with their ratty modifications. I assembled the core structure, which is basically just two big side panels for the tank track assembly and then a center chassis, but I didn't glue this up yet so that I've got great access to the center inside of the vehicle. There is a port on the front of the hull, which is usually a casement mounted heavy weapon, but at some point this has been blown out in the combat of the Siege of Terra. I used one of the many pintle mounted weapons that come with this kit intended for the commander gun up on the turret and mounted that to the external firing port, like the rats have kind of bolted that on haphazardly, and then poked through a little clan rat from inside. Look at his little face, he's just cackling with glee as he immolates the foes of the Cult of the Fang. Our next little spot is this engine port on the back, but the original panel covering didn't give me much scope for rat shenanigans, so I grabbed a big pile of bits from some of my Orc conversions, long-time viewers might remember, and found this amazing little aircraft cannon in placement, which the rat mechanics have bolted onto the back of their Russ to cover the rear of their ramshackle vehicle as they flee from their enemy's wrath after raiding a choice pile of enemy loot. Next, the chassis needed a bunch of extra support struts, and of course the main turret, which I assembled with a demolisher cannon for that classic close quarters Leman Russ vibe, and then glued the tank track assemblies in place. And then it's time for our next little rat, another gunner poking out of the top of the turret. He also needs to be trimmed down to get the right height, and then of course the third pintle mounted turret to blam blam the enemy, this time a multi-laser. To really start customizing this vehicle and increase the transport capacity vibes, I layered a bunch of random armor plating and corrugated iron across the rear support struts and the back of the hull, which gave me more surface area to mount up a heap more rat cultists. I love the idea that this battered, blown apart Leman Russ shell is really more of a battle wagon now. The main gun probably doesn't even have any ammunition, so instead it's an armored transport with as many rats as possible climbing in and on the vehicle as they make their raids through the wasteland. There is a lot more battle damage and details to do on this piece as well as the Dreadnought, but first our mechanized rat raiding party needs some scouts to find out where all the good loot is.
I'm so excited to start getting these cult models down on the board. I'm thinking I'll even build like a narrative scenery piece, like the cult headquarters or something, but I just wanted to come out here to the studio, the Imperial Palace board, to give a massive shout out to all my YouTube channel members and my Patreons. They keep everything going here at Zorpazorp. They mean everything to me. And to celebrate that, very soon we're going to be tricking out the Imperial Palace board with some banners and statuary and carved stonework with the names of the Patreons. So if you want to support Zorpazorp and support the Imperial Palace and get your name on the build, go and check out Patreon, linked in the description, or become a channel member here on YouTube. Or if you just want to throw down some support, go and chuck a super chat down in the comments. They are so helpful as well. A massive thank you, guys. Right, let's get back to this army, the Cult of the Fang.
I'm loving the new Solar Auxilia vehicles. They're perfect for the looted options in the ruins of the Imperial Palace. So up next is 2 Hermes pattern Sentinels. First, I knocked up the 2 chassis of the Walkers, giving them a nice dynamic pose to be on the hunt for the good loot, and then it's of course time to make the pilot, and we have entered some new territory here. First, I was going to try and jam in a whole clan rat into the pilot seat, but it would have been a huge amount of sculpting and reposing of the pretty monopose model, so instead I grabbed one of the spare rat heads and tried simply sticking it poking out of the top of the Solar Auxilia warrior. They're actually about the same stature, so this little rat has looted the pilot's uniform too. As if it wasn't enough to die defending the Imperial Palace, now the Adeptus Arbites will probably write up this poor lad's corpse for indecent exposure. For the second rat pilot, I went even more extreme, using one of the Solar Auxilia arms to drive the walker, and then used one of the rat arms, sculpting a bunch of ragged cloth with green stuff and some looted armor plates to blend the rat arm and the Imperial armor together. This is a much better approach, as we have more of a blend of the 2 aesthetics, and I'm excited to think about what other things I could do with the infantry units combining Solar Auxilia kits with the Skaven models. I think this is the key to these walkers and my vehicles in general. There must be an equal amount of Imperial original pieces and rat modified parts. Now all these looted vehicles need a bunch more detailing, but first I wanted to flesh out the hordes of the cult itself, starting off with some of the heavier support. Snarkrot and his cunning rat mechanics might have risen through the ranks of the Cult of the Fang because of their looting, hoarding, scrap-bashing smarts, but they need some enforcers to not only deal death to their enemies, but keep the rat hordes in line back in the cult headquarters. So I grabbed the 3 rat ogres from Skaventide and did a rough assembly, planning out some pretty awesome conversions. The first ogre already has a big cannon built into the flesh and hide of his arm, and I love this vibe of flesh-grafted weapon augmentation, and decided to modify his Skaven cannon into a massive heavy flamer. This was a simple conversion. I just cut away parts of the cannon to blend seamlessly with the flamer's receiver, and then repositioned some of the cannon power cables to join the heavy flamer and make it feel really cohesive. I went a bit more ambitious with the second ogre, grafting a Terminator assault cannon arm to his arm by cutting away the flesh until the proportions were just right, and then gluing the cannon arm in place at the wrist and blending the join with green stuff sculpted fur and sinew. The third ogre also totes a heavy flamer, but again without any of the existing Skaven cannons to mount it to, I had to glue straight onto his flesh and blend it with green stuffed fur and sinew, but this time I also added some pipes and cabling that run from the flamer into the flesh of his back, joining some pipes and cables that are already sculpted there, which just added an awesome detail. Then some simple reposing on the base to get some real dynamism into the models, and Snarkrot's enforcers are ready to keep the Cult of the Fang in line.
Just a quick shout out to my mate Con's new sort of like social networking app for finding other wargamers. It's called Voxlink. All the links are down in the description. You guys have probably heard me talk about it before. It's awesome. So you want to find games, get on Voxlink. Go check it out. It's Wednesday night and this video has to be finished on Friday. There's so much to do and I'm running out of time. I need more details and weathering and battle damage on the vehicles. We of course need infantry. The cultists will play a huge role in the campaign. They need a lot of speccing up, but this whole army has a narrative in the campaign. They're looting gear, they're hoarding technology to reawaken their lord and master, the god of the rat cult. A Cerastus Knight, absolutely decked out with rats and Cult of the Fang iconography. That's gonna be a lot of work. I also wanted them to all be painted. I'm gonna have to make some hard decisions.
I'm going to dive into one of my favorite steps in any crazy Warhammer conversion, battle damage, and with all these looted vehicles, this phase is absolutely bananas. I started with the Dreadnought and grabbed my pin vise and scalpel and just started hacking away at the resin. Impact craters start off as a bored out hole, which I then widen and spider outwards with carved chips with my scalpel. The amazing thing about Forge World resin is it chips and shatters just like ceramite should, so it's an absolute joy to weather. The large drill bit makes for some really nice chunky impacts, which I then detail out with the scalpel, and of course this Dreadnought needs to have a kill shot, a wound that would have enabled it to be looted in the first place, so I opted for a las cannon blast that crippled the front armor plate and hit a critical system, for a nice visual link to this Dreadnought's fate in the Siege of Terra. Then I grabbed one of the infantry sprues from the new plastic Solar Auxilia and mined it for a bunch more accessories, armor plates, grenades, pouches, and used those to trick up my 3 rats riding on the Dreadnought's back, and then grabbed a bunch of vehicle accessories from some care packages sent to me by Jack French and Carl J, stacked with goodies for the Imperial Palace, big thanks to those guys, and decorated the Dreadnought with loot and supplies on the upper railing. Then I did the same for my 2 Sentinels, adding saddlebags and pouches and tools and some las rifles and carbines mounted on slings. These little walkers might be the scouts for the looting party, but if these pilots see something really choice, they are definitely jumping down to grab it for themselves. I also modified the first rat pilot to have a big club and added a bunch more ragged cloth, and now I'm really happy with both of those.
If you guys would like to see some mental battle reports on the Imperial Palace mega board, go and subscribe to Zorphammer. It's linked down in the description, my battle report channel. We start filming battle reports on this board, I think in about a week, and it would mean the world if you guys were already over there waiting for them. So go and check out Zorphammer.
Then we have the big one, the Lehman Russ. I started off just like the Dreadnought, carving and chipping away at the plastic to make bullet holes, impact craters, and the odd scratch from some power weapons. Rather than a specific kill shot, I opted for just mass damage with little holes piercing the armor plating all over the place. This poor tank was worn down in the constant attrition of battle. To increase the transport vibes, I even had a few little rats poking out of the blast holes, and one of the sponson firing ports had swung open with one of my more armored rat cultists leaning out firing a las rifle. Then just like the Dreadnought, I added a bunch of looted Imperial gear and equipment to the rat cultists riding on the battle wagon, as well as a bunch more loot strapped onto the vehicle itself. Weapons, ammunition, fuel drums, just to keep layering on that detail, and I am just utterly blown away by how this mechanized centerpiece has come together. But it's finally time to make the horde of cultist infantry. As these guys are going to be super important for the campaign, I don't just want 40 of the same model. I need a little bit of variety, so I've decided to use the rest of the clan rats broken down into 3 types. The first group is the simplest, a combat style unit who simply have the sword and boards that the clan rats come with, but are tricked out with pouches and grenades and equipment to transport the models to a bit more of the aesthetic of Warhammer 40k and 30k. I even gave some of the squad leaders some sweet looted power weapons from the Solar Auxilia command sprue and a few extra armor plates to make them stand out. Our second group is a bunch of posers that have really easily accessible sword arms that I can clip off and replace with a range of Solar Auxilia pistols. These are done with a simple hand swap, and then I just hide the join between the gauntlet and the flesh of the rat with some ragged cloth fragments in green stuff. This gives me a nice short-ranged unit who still like to get in for a scrap. For a more elite unit of rat cultists, further up the pecking order in the cult hierarchy and much better armed, I used the Solar Auxilia troopers with a rat head swap just like the pilots of the Sentinels. I can imagine some poor Imperial patrol being ambushed and their gear getting stripped. Perhaps this infantry unit was supporting the very Sentinels we've already built, and now their gear adorns an elite bodyguard for the leaders of the Cult of the Fang. As I've stolen all the shoulder pads that would normally go on these models, I sculpted some cloth fragments draped over their shoulders to bring more rat vibes into these Imperial models. Then, to see our force in all its converted glory, I jumped back out into the studio and set them up amongst the albeit out of scale ruins of the Imperial Palace, and I'm really happy with how this force has come together. The next step is to convert up the massive centerpiece of the army, the Cerastus Rat Knight of the Cult of the Fang. Then I need some scenery to represent their cult headquarters for a narrative mission in the campaign, and of course, they all need a paint job. And maybe, if you guys enjoyed this very insane, bizarre hobby video, we might be able to dive into that, into another descent of hobby madness right here on Zorpazorp.